another excellent paper. I look forward to discussing it. Our last presenter today is Estela Roselló of the University and she is going to speak with us today on Longings for Equality, the French sensibility of Pierre Bailly, a black man who felt like white, New Orleans, 1794.
Yes, hello everybody. I want to ask you if my presentation, if I am sharing the screen, can you see my images?
Yes, we can. You want me to move it for you, Estela?
Yes, please. But well, yes, that will be fine, Laura. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So let's start now. Well, first of all, I want to thank the coordinators of the CIRGEN and the organizing team of our wonderful meeting for the invitation and the opportunity to be in this splendid academic conversation and having the opportunity to hear all your talks and thinking many other questions. On the other hand, I would like to dedicate the following reflections to the memory of Kimberly Hanger, an American historian specialist in New Orleans who unfortunately left this world very young. It was through her articles that I became aware of the archival documents that inspire the following ideas and that I first came into contact with the fascinating character of Pierre Bailly. The story I want to share with you during this session is a story of otherness and identities that shows us, among many other things, the way in which the sensitivity of an era can permeate the emotionality of subjects and may constitute part of many individual identities which are built from unique and unrepeatable historical experiences. I follow, obviously, Natalie Zemon Davis' methodology in trying to present some aspects of a history of life which can give us many hints about macro processes and about emotional universes which gave sense to a transitional era as was the end of the 18th century. The documents which inspire the following reflections are two judicial processes and are found in the AGI and in the Louisiana Colonial Document Collection. Laura, can we just have the other image, please? On February 11, 1794, Francisco Luis Héctor Barón de Caron de Let, governor and general intendant of the province of Louisiana and of Florida Occidental, decided to arrest the free mulatto Pierre Bailly and sent him to the prison of the Cabaña Castle in Havana. The reason for Bailly's arrest was that he had unleashed seditious acts against the Spanish government, I quote, manifesting an inclination to the maxims of the French Constitution by expressing ideas that hinted at his desire for equality. I close the quote. Bailly, next please. Bailly was a wealthy free mulatto, resident of the city of Spanish New Orleans, owner of lands, houses, warehouses, and several slaves. Besides, he was a lieutenant in the New Orleans Pardo Company, and he was also a money lender. It is also known that for years he held various trades such as blacksmith and woodcutter. But for the Spanish authorities, Bailly was just an insubordinated, disobedient, and haughty subject who questioned the legitimacy of the system of hierarchies and political and social inequalities which sustained the Spanish monarchical and colonial order. Certainly, the political and social order of the city of New Orleans at the end of the 18th century was based on a very complex system of hierarchies that fueled strong tensions between different sectors of the population. During the years of Hispanic rule, that is, after the French cession to Spain in 1763, the white elites were divided by French filiations and Spanish loyalties, and besides these latent confrontations between the European white population, there was a confrontation between the free blacks and the mulattoes and the Afro-descendant slaves on whom the plantation economy depended. Needless to say, the greatest social tension in the city was felt between white European people and the Afro-descendant residents. But the origin of the social tensions was not only internal, but also external for the crescent city. As you may remember, 1790s decade was a special convulsed period for the European monarchies who were fighting to preserve their political and economic power in the Caribbean colonies. Next, please. The Haiti Revolution broke out in 1791 as a result of an alliance between the white elites contrary to the French monarchy and the free blacks who wanted to obtain the same freedoms and rights that until then had been exclusive to whites. In 1793, the British attacked French colonies in order to stop the possible revolutionary expansion in Jamaica, and the Spanish crown took advantage of the situation, trying to recover the total territory of La Española by promising black slaves their liberty if they fought against the French. On March 27, 1793, Spain declared the war to France. To tell the truth, next please, the Spanish crown never relied completely on its slave allies, but the monarchy needed them to fight to recover its old Caribbean colony from France. In fact, during the 1790s, Spanish authorities of New Orleans felt very concerned about the colored population freed and enslaved, as they saw in this social group a threat and a possible source of expansion for the ideology of the French revolutionaries in America. It was within this context that in 1793, New Orleans Spanish authorities moved troops to certain points of their territory, intending to avoid possible French invasions from the Gulf to the Mississippi. This is why the intendant governor Carondelet sent troops and militias of blacks, pardos, and whites to build and defend the fort of San Felipe de Placaminos in that year. And it was precisely in that place that Captain Bailly generated controversy, discomfort, suspicion, and also disorder among the soldiers that were waiting for the French in the defensive fort. According to the captains who testified against him, during the 2 months of the Placaminos siege, Bailly dedicated himself to show contempt for the orders of his white superiors. The free mulatto did not fulfill his hours of service, and he feigned illness so as not to participate in the construction work of the fort. Moreover, he constantly challenged the authority of his Spanish superiors and declared that no one should work in the fort in a forced way. That is, he defended the idea that the mulattoes and blacks of the militias could refuse to work in the fort defense works. The latter is especially interesting if one remembers the French revolutionary concepts of slavery and service. Very briefly, according to the slavery and servitude definitions found in the 1755 Encyclopedia, next please, servants should have the right to stop working for their employers whenever they wanted. It is interesting to note that this was precisely what Bailly was defending in Placaminos with his own words and daily deeds. In other words, we can assume that for him, the defense of not working for the Spaniards in the fort was a way to place himself very far from the servile condition that had affected his Afro-descendant ancestors throughout centuries. Evidently, the free mulatto had never read the French encyclopedia. In fact, it is known that Bailly was illiterate, but obviously his attitude was moved by a particular sensitivity around the meaning of slavery and servitude, a sensitivity that may have been inspired by rumors and popular conversations among Black and mulatto American population, where the ideas of the French Revolution circulated in oral ways. This popular sensibility was certainly built from white and European ideas, emotions, and dreams, but all of them were adapted and appropriated by this particular Black population who incorporated elements typical of the American realities of slavery, racism, and colonial inequalities. Let me tell you a little more. Please, the 2 next images, please. Don Luis de Clonet, second lieutenant of the Louisiana Regiment who participated in the defense of the Placaminos fort, recounted how on one occasion Pierre Bailly approached him to ask what did he think of the possible invasion of the French. De Clonet replied that they had to be ready to defend religion and the king, since the French were, I quote, enemies of all humanity. Bailly's furious response was immediate. And I am going to quote now Bailly's words. of humanity, I do not see, sir, the inhumanities they have committed. They have done well wrong in having killed their king. But, sir, I am going to speak to you with all frankness, convinced that you are a man of honor. Well, sir, the French are just. They have granted men their rights, a general equality among men. We, people of color, have the title of active citizens on the island of Santo Domingo and other French islands. We can speak openly like any white and have the same degrees as them. And under our reign, do we have any of this? No, sir, and it's unfair. Being all human, there should be no difference. The color should not distinguish men, but the way of thinking. I close the quote. 3 years before Pierre Bailly was imprisoned in the Cabaña Castle in Havana, the mulatto was accused and sentenced for inciting other free mulattoes to take up arms against the Spanish monarchy in New Orleans. Next, please. This happened during a black dance. This was a kind of party that worried Spanish authorities a lot, since they believed that during those meetings, blacks and mulattoes, next please, forged conspiracies that could threaten the order and tranquility of the city in those dances. Next, please. I have here two images that I will explain later if we have time, but can we have number 12, please, Laura? Then next image, next. That one, please. During the party, Bailly had a heated argument with other free mulattoes who refused to go along with him when he incited them to revolt against the whites. At some point, next please, during the fight, Bailly asked his interlocutors what kind of people they were, to which many replied that they were mulattoes or blacks. When one of them asked Bailly what kind of person he was, our free mulatto replied, I am black, but I feel as white. Next, please. What did Bailly mean by that interesting statement? How did the free mulatto understand the possibility of being black and feel as white? In what way would the awareness of having the white sensitivity have influenced the self-construction of an inner self and a black identity different, for example, to slave black identities of the same historic period? Evidently, Pierre Bailly was not thinking of himself as equal to his other slave blacks, but only equal to the free blacks and mulattoes of the world. In fact, Pierre Bailly's story makes us ask many other questions. Undoubtedly, all of them are related to what Sarah Ahmed has called the human capacity for orientation. Like many other free blacks and mulattoes from the end of the 18th century in the American, Caribbean, and Atlantic world, the possession of colored bodies crossed by centuries of mistreatment, abuse, pain, injustice, and inequality resulted in a contradiction in the desire to achieve everything that granted the fact of sharing whiteness. In the collective imaginary of many black men and women, being white was synonym of having rights, opportunities, and freedoms finally built exclusively for certain sectors of the European and North American population whose bodies did not have dark pigments. For Bailly, the existential compass of his vital orientation, the one that could place him in the place where he wanted to be, revolved around his desire to be equal to white, and above all, to receive exactly the same treatment as the same treatment received by those who hated him, he hated so much. In this sense, it is certainly paradoxical to think that Pierre Bailly's white sensibility was expressed precisely in that feeling of moral superiority that he himself experienced for those who still reproduced the unacceptable privileges of whiteness that he actually longed for deep in his blackness. Can we have the other images, please? Yes, next. Just to conclude, as I have tried to show throughout these minutes, the history of the free mulatto of Spanish New Orleans gives us clues to reconstruct many of the tensions and contradictions present in any story that attempts to approach human reality from the sensible dimension. Also, the story of this free mulatto of the 18th century is a story that throws important keys to understand the way in which the sensitive rhetoric with which the subjects reconstruct and interpret themselves and their reality are obviously always dynamic, changing, and flexible. In other words, studying the historical processes of reconstruction and appropriation of emotional rhetorics always leads us to remember that, as the Mexican historian Juan Pedro Vigueira points out, the object of study of historians is precisely diversity. Thank you very much.